And we begin tonight with breaking news. The New York Times is reporting that Mark Meadows, former chief of staff, has testified before the federal grand jury hearing evidence in special counsel Jack Smith's investigations. It's not clear when Meadows testified or which part of the investigation he was asked about. But this is a significant development. Quoting from the Times, Meadows was around for pivotal moments leading up to and after the 2020 election as Trump plotted to stay in office and thwart Joe Biden from being sworn in to succeed him. Some of them were described in hundreds of text messages that Meadows turned over to the House Select Committee that investigated the January 6th attack at the Capitol before he decided to stop cooperating. Those texts served as a roadmap for House investigators. But Meadows also has insight into efforts by the National Archives to retrieve roughly 24 boxes of presidential material that officials had been told Trump took with him when he left the White House in January 2021. Meadows was one of Trump's representatives to the archives, and he had some role in trying to discuss the matter with Trump, according to two people briefed on the matter. This development comes as we are learning new details about the classified documents case and how another grand jury in Florida is also hearing from witnesses. The New York Times reports there are indications that the Washington grand jury may have stopped hearing witness testimony in recent weeks, according to three people familiar with its workings. As for the Florida grand jury, which began hearing evidence last month, only a handful of witnesses have testified before it or are scheduled to appear. At least one witness has already testified there, and another is set to testify on Wednesday. The Times also reports that among those who have appeared before the D.C. grand jury in the past few months or have been subpoenaed by it are more than 20 members of Trump's Secret Service security detail. Earlier today, NBC News exclusively caught the special counsel on video for the first time, who unsurprisingly remained tight-lipped.
Is an indictment coming soon, sir? Is an investigation wrapping up, sir?
Trump, in the meantime, is doing the complete opposite, lashing out on his fake Twitter social media site, calling the investigation election interference, and even referring to the DOJ and the FBI as Marxists and fascists. While on Capitol Hill, his cronies are once again lining up to do the former president's legal bidding at taxpayer expense. Today, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan sent a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland demanding an unredacted copy of the memorandum outlining the scope of Mr. Smith's probes regarding President Trump and any supporting documentation relating to his appointment as special counsel. This is all coming to a head right as the 2024 campaign is getting underway. And while in any normal universe, a potential federal indictment would be the nail in the coffin for a presidential candidate, for Trump, it's actually causing Republican lawmakers to double down on their support, which should come as no surprise, considering they didn't flinch during his two impeachments, a Capitol insurrection, his arrest in New York for paying off a porn star and being found liable for sexual abuse. Republicans are standing by their man, even as more and more candidates are jumping into the Republican race. Tomorrow, former VP Mike Pence, whose Trump's followers at the Capitol riot wanted to hang, is expected to formally announce his bid for the White House. And any moment now, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie will officially launch his presidential campaign, in which he appears to be the only Republican candidate who's actually willing to take on the twice impeached, once indicted, found liable for sexual abuse, former president.
Donald Trump made us smaller by dividing us even further and pitting one group against another, different groups pitted against different groups every day. And by definition, making those groups smaller.
Joining me now is George Conway, conservative lawyer and Washington Post contributing columnist. Welcome to the show. Good to have you here, Mr. Conway. So ABC News is reporting now that Mark Meadows answered questions about both potential Jack Smith cases, election interference and classified documents. Your thoughts?
That's very, very significant. And if he is cooperating with Mr. Smith and the Justice Department and the FBI, that's a very bad sign for Donald Trump, particularly in the January 6th investigation, where he was really the gatekeeper in keeping with respect to communications to Trump, where people were trying to get through to Trump and say, Trump, you have to say something, Mr. President, you have to say something. He was the guy who was basically opening and closing the door and talking to Trump, and he was the one who got, I think, Ivanka to come down to talk to her father. He was basically, Grand Central Station that day. And if there's anyone who could shed light on Trump's state of mind, what he did, what he didn't do, it's Mark Meadows, and that's got to be a very, very disturbing thing for Donald Trump.
So yesterday, we learned of this other grand jury. There's a Florida grand jury now. There's a Washington grand jury. The Washington grand jury is going to re-up on Wednesday and hear witnesses. We know just a couple of people have gone down in Florida. Do you have any sense, as given your background as a prosecutor, given just all the things that you've heard, of whether or not you can tell whether the Jack Smith process has a more ripe sort of conclusion in the documents case or in the January 6th case? Because the Meadows testimony suggests to me that part of it actually isn't dead, and I think a lot of people had been focusing just on documents. I'm
going to disclaim being a prosecutor.
I'm sorry.
I did some white collar. Well, you promoted me. I did some white collar defense in my lifetime, but I think that it's pretty clear that the documents investigation is approaching the end. I mean, you can just feel it by the number of leaks that are occurring, and what happens in these investigations is that defense lawyers share information because my guy went into the grand jury. He wants to know before he goes in what your guy said. So I'm talking to you as fellow lawyers, and they all share information, and it all gets passed around. And when you reach the late stages of a very large investigation like this, there are lots and lots of people who know basically what has been told to the grand jury and to the FBI and the prosecutors outside the grand jury, and they know this, and they're free to talk about it, unlike the prosecutors or the grand jurors themselves. So that's why we see a lot of these leaks coming out, and the fact that Trump's lawyers went in there yesterday and went into the Justice Department to meet with presumably Jack Smith and maybe the head of the criminal division. I don't know who they met with, but that shows you that they are near the end of the line. And when you think about the timing of it, if you want to try a case before you want to bring a case before the election season starts, and you certainly want to try it before the election actually happens. Your best shot at doing that is to bring that case now in the next few weeks.
I mean, James Comey said that Trump could be wearing an ankle bracelet while he's accepting the Republican convention. I mean, the idea of having this running into. I don't agree with Comey yet, but yeah. I mean, you're right. So the fact that you do have this Florida grand jury and the Washington grand jury, this is from the New York Times. They said that there are two possibilities that are suggested by the fact of these two grand juries. One is that the investigation in Washington is largely complete, and prosecutors are now poised to make a decision about bringing charges there while still weighing other potential indictments in Florida. The other is that Mr. Smith has decided that Florida is the proper venue for any charges he might bring in the case and has moved the entire grand jury proceeding there. And, sort of the theory of the case is that the alleged crime, at least the documents part, took place at Mar-a-Lago. Do you have a sense of which of those seems more real?
I wouldn't hazard a guess. I mean, but the fact is, the Sixth Amendment requires that criminal defendants be tried before juries from the state and the district in which the crime is committed. And so that's an interesting question. For Trump, it's an interesting question because he did a lot of obstruction in Florida, but the obstruction was directed at people in Washington. And so it could be that they've decided that the low-risk route is that to bring the case in Florida or to bifurcate it and take which is what they did with the Manafort situation. They had a case in the Eastern District across the river, Eastern Virginia, and a case here in the District of Columbia. Or it could be that a maintenance person at Mar-a-Lago went into the FBI's field office in Miami and lied his butt off, and they want to bring some standalone 1001 charges, and they got to do it before that grand jury.
They might want to prosecute someone else.
We don't actually know. We won't know until we actually see these indictments, how they pleaded the indictments, and how what position they're taking on venue.
Mark Meadows figures in one of the more recent revelations about Donald Trump's handling or mishandling of those classified documents. He's at Bedminster in New Jersey, and he's giving an interview, and this is regarding Mark Meadows' book. And he's waving a piece of paper, which we don't know what that piece of paper was.
You hear it on the tape, I guess.
This proves Mark Milley is a liar. This proves General Milley is a liar. Could it be that the interviews, and we don't know when they took place, we know they're about both, are because Mark Meadows is considered a witness, or is he in any way potentially in any legal trouble himself?
Well,
because he did participate, as you said, in January 6th.
I think he has some exposure potentially for January 6th because he was participating in these calls. I think he was participated in the Raffensperger call, if I remember correctly. He was, passing on directions to people to do things on behalf of Trump, such as I think he may have had some involvement in the fake electors. I don't remember from all the hearings from last
summer. So many things.
But yeah, I think he may have some exposure there, which means he really does have an incentive to cooperate there. I don't know whether he has exposure in the documents case.
Sure.
But at all events, if you're going to cooperate with the government, you have to cooperate all the way.
Yeah.
They don't take part way.
And he can't do what he did with the January 6th committee, which was refuse to cooperate.
Correct.